Hello students, this is Richard with a mini lecture today on the Hawthorne effect. To talk about the Hawthorne effect, I'm going to tell you a little story. The Hawthorne effect gets its name from a series of experiments at the Hawthorne Works factory where telephone parts were manufactured. This was outside the city of Chicago. The owners were interested in increasing productivity. And so they brought in some researchers to see if they could influence productivity in some way. All right. The researchers, not really knowing what to do, started with manipulating the lighting. Okay. So now thinking back to our independent and dependent variables, in this case, the independent variable would be the lighting, which would mean the dependent variable would be what? Would be production. All right. Now, since this was a regular working factory, they already knew the average output of a worker, let's say, was 500 pieces a day. For example, that would be their baseline. Once they manipulate the independent variable, they could measure that dependent variable to see if maybe then the worker produced 550 pieces, to see if that production would go up. So, like I said, not really knowing what to do, they adjusted the lights down, they dimmed the lights. What do you think their hypothesis was? I know what mine would be, and that would be probably that it would be more difficult to see and production would probably go down. In fact, what happened was production went up. Okay. Now, if you're like me, you're scratching your head. All right, well, I wasn't expecting that, but okay. They dimmed the lights even further in a later study, and guess what they found? Production went up again. Okay? So, like I said, this was a series of experiments, and really, no matter what they decided to manipulate on that independent variable, productivity always went up. Okay? What they ended up finding out was that the workers always knew when the scientists were there. Okay? And so, being humans, they wanted to be looked at favorably. They wanted to be seen as good workers, efficient, productive workers, and so they always stepped up their game. This picture isn't from Hawthorne, and I don't know that the scientist would have been this obvious, standing over you with a white lab coat and a notepad, but you get the drift from this. The worker, when a person is standing over them, watching them, taking notes, you're definitely going to change things, and like I said, probably step up your game. So, this is the Hawthorne effect. It is the unintended influence that researchers have on their subjects. Now, in Hawthorne, this had to do with productivity, okay, but it really can be any kind of influence at all. All right, it can be not necessarily increasing productivity, but just if you are involved in a psychological or a sociological study, you might want to present yourself as the person you would like to be instead of maybe the person you are on any given day. Okay? This should make sense to you, right? Because when you're at work and the boss stops in or the boss is around, you probably also change your behavior, step your game up. Okay? And so this is something very specific to a specific problem of social science that social scientists have to contend with. Well and good, you say. What do they do to avoid the Hawthorne effect? Well, in the case of field studies, for example, this is Margaret Mead, who did famous research on Samoa, and she spent years and years with her group, and that's what you have to do. If you are doing field studies, you have to spend loads and loads of time with your group. Okay, at first it's going to be awkward, you're going to be the outsider, but after a while You'll get to know them. They'll get to know you. They'll know your likes and dislikes, your flaws. They will begin to trust you. And after a while, you can feel reasonably assured that they are acting as they regularly would, whether you were there or not. Okay? This takes a long time, and ethnography or field studies are very labor intensive. Okay? Time intensive. Let's see, what about experimental methods? In experiments, you essentially try to obscure to the participants what your variables are, what it is you're really interested in, what it is you're really looking at. Think about a magic trick or a card trick, where with one hand you have the audience look at your left hand, when really in your right hand you're doing the magic. Okay? And so this is what social sciences have to do when they're in their experimental methods. Now, you are already familiar with this because you have looked at Ash conformity and the Milgram shock experiments, and in each of those, the participants thought something else was really being measured. In Ash, the participants thought it was a vision test, and in Milgram, they thought it was a test to see punishment on learning ability, making these word associations. Okay. Now, not all of these social science experiments have this sort of nefarious tilt, you might think, with the shock experiments especially. Okay. I give those to you just because they are good, strong examples of obscuring the variables. Okay, but you can be reasonably assured if you are a participant in a sociological or psychological experiment that the researcher is going to do whatever they can to not make it clear what it is they're really looking at, what they're studying. Okay? So, I hope you enjoyed this mini lecture. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, feel free to post to the discussion board or drop me an email. Okay? Thanks, and bye-bye.